Welcome to AI and Automation in Action, where we show business leaders how to turn AI from a buzzword into measurable operational leverage. If you're serious about operational efficiency and responsible AI adoption, you're in the right place.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another edition of AI and Automation in Action. You'll notice today that I am without Hunter. Hunter is on vacation at the time of the recording. So I thought today what we might do is dive into some concepts and some topics as they relate to AI and automation, as opposed to a traditional episode where we dive into the automations themselves. So you've heard us talk many times in the past about API access. That's one of the most fundamental components that we leverage when it comes to AI and automation builds. And we've covered this in the past, but I want to give a high-level explanation of what an API is. API stands for Application Programming Interface. Now, APIs have been around for a long time. It's basically a window or door, if you will, into the software application and its operations. One example is an API may give you access to their SQL database or to the functions of the application, maybe a read or write function. Basically, it is the gateway to allow an external application to be able to talk to a specific application. Now, in the last year or so, as AI has been developing very, very rapidly, faster than any technology I've ever seen before, we've also been introduced to another concept called an MCP, or Model Context Protocol. Now, this is an evolution of the way to allow external applications into the data or into the functions of a specific application. And what we're seeing in the industry is that many applications may have already had an API, but now they're also adding an MCP server function into the mix. So we want to talk today about what the differences are between the two and why you might use one over the other, because as you are evaluating AI and automation integrations, you want to know what's available to you. And so that's one of the key distinctions. You know, we've talked about that previously. Most industries, you made purchasing decisions when it comes to software based upon what the application function was, and secondarily, what did it integrate with in terms of other tools. Now, in recent years, that discussion and that decision point has changed from what the native integrations were to, does it have an open API access? If it did, it opened up more options for you if you had someone that could help you develop that connection into the API. In the last year, MCP has become the next conversation point. And so I want to help illustrate the differences between the two and why you might use one over the other. So I'll share out a screen. I've got a simple table that we'll walk through that's got an example, and not necessarily a technical example, but hopefully something that makes a little more sense when it comes to how you can compare the two. So if we will think about this, let's think about, your business or the application itself more like you would a building. And let's say you've got a contractor that's coming in that wants to get your operational files. So with the traditional API model, what that would compare to is the contractor would come into your building and they'll get a badge from security and a key ring. And the idea is the badge gets them through the basic entrance, and then the key ring may open many doors. In a lot of cases, it may be a master key that opens all the doors. Now, once that contractor comes in, those keys and that badge are good until they actually expire, meaning that if they keep the badge and they keep the master key, now you've got a risk that they're out there with these keys and these badges that unless someone's tracking them, it creates risk. They can come in at any time and do whatever they're allowed to do with those keys and that badge. So when we look at the permission scope, most of the time, the traditional API, they're provisioned with more permissions than are actually needed simply because it's quick and easy. So to really get into narrowing down an API access, you want to make sure that you scope that API key or that API access to the minimum set of permissions that you need for the function. So if we extend that conversation a little further, that contractor comes in and they need to get, your operational folders. So they can go into the records room where you store those operational folders. But unfortunately, because there's many file cabinets in there, they can see everything that's in there, including payroll ins, including bank account information. It's basically an open file room, even though they wanted to come in just to get the operations folder. Now, they're also in this room that has access to mail. So messages can actually be sent out if they wanted to do something maliciously, or even not maliciously, but if it's in good intent, because it's not been narrowed down in terms of the scope, they've got access to the room and they've got access to the functions inside of the room. When it comes to the overall security, most of what you're going to get in this example is, security is going to know that the badge was used to get into the building, but they're not going to know what files they went to when they got into the actual file room. Now, that obviously creates some security concerns about being able to view and see what was done in that chain of events. So an audit trail is something that you want to be looking at. How do you narrow that down and create as many data points as you can when it comes to having access to what was viewed or used? And when it comes to the cost as it relates to AI, most AI models now, you're paying for a set amount of tokens or credits, depending on which model you're using. And when it comes to APIs, because this contractor came in and they've been given free access to the entire file room, they may actually say, you know what? I don't want to have to make a second trip here. So let's take that entire file cabinet instead of the folder that I need out of the file cabinet in case I want to see something that's also in that file cabinet at a later date. Now, when they come out with that entire file cabinet, when we relate that to AI, that is a huge amount of data versus a single folder. And so when you're paying by token usage, that, unless you scope that API call, dramatically can increase the cost. So when we talk about APIs, it depends on the applications, but a lot of applications actually charge for API access. And you may only get a set number of API calls. And you got to factor that in. So it could be that they, in order to save cost, may pull everything at once. They may pull that entire file cabinet. When they do that, your AI costs go up. But it's a balancing act between the API call limits versus the AI token usage. And it's just something that you want to be aware of. Now, when we look at, what is the overall risk? Basically, having an API is a huge advantage when we want to look at getting access to software and the data that it stores and interconnecting applications. The risks are that, an overprivileged or an overpowered badge and master key can get access to pretty much the entire building in this example, or the entire application and what it stores with not a lot of oversight. When we start looking at, is there a better way? That's why MCP was introduced, that model context protocol. And so we're going to go back to that same example. So you still got the contractor that needs to come in and get the information that's in the operations folder. But instead of them coming in and getting a badge and a master key to basically go wherever they want inside the building, they now get the opportunity where they check in with a front desk operator. And that front desk operator is actually going to ask them, what are you looking to get? And they're going to escort them through the building. So now all of a sudden, it's gone from here's your key and your badge, go find whatever you want, use whatever you want. Now someone's actually going along with them and making sure that what they're asking for is what they get. And in addition, they're not getting that master key where they can go into the entire office or the entire building. They're also not getting access to the entire file cabinets. And instead of being exposed to the payroll file cabinet and the bank file cabinet, instead they're given the operations folder out of the specific file cabinet drawer. And again, we're narrowing that scope down to where we only give out what is specifically needed. In addition, They don't have access to send mail like in the previous example with API. If it's there and available, they could do that. Within the MCP model, it's a separate approval, and you got to go back to that front desk and get a separate person to escort you and make sure that they watch what you're doing when it comes to that functionality. In the terms of the audit trail, that front desk operator that's escorting you along the way logs every visit, every request, every room, every folder, everything that is done is granularly stored in that log. So now you can go back and audit it at a very high level. In addition, we're only giving out the information specifically requested. And when we look at the cost of that, because we're not returning the entire file cabinet, we're just returning a folder or a document. Our AI token usage is a much smaller set. So when we look at which model is used versus which one is available, if you don't have access to an MCP, the only option you have is an API. A lot of times that may not be available to you. So as you're starting to evaluate your applications and how you interconnect them and how AI can help you, these two concepts are going to come to play. In terms of what happens if it's misconfigured, we've talked about that on the API access. If it's not narrowed down to least privileges needed, you're exposing a ton of access and information. In terms of the MCP, going back to that building example, that front desk, as long as they're trained and they know what to do and how to do it, most of the time you can control that access. But you can still have that front desk operator that really doesn't follow, or they're not trained well and not limited to what they have access to. So there is still risk there. It's not unique to APIs. It can go both ways. So as we look at it from which one is better for you, I would say if you have access to MCP and you have factored in the cost for the API access, MCP probably is the better way to go in most scenarios. API may be the best way to go if there is no separate API cost and there are no restrictions on it in terms of how many calls that can be made during a given time. So we basically look at the two different models as APIs being the keys and badges for the entire building versus MCP being a smart front desk operator that uses the keys instead of giving them out and has a more detailed log to explain what was done and when. So in terms of what you guys should use, it's really going to come down to the exact scenario, what you're looking to accomplish. And at the end of the day, what you need to do is make an educated decision based upon the requirements, based upon how many times it's going to be called, based upon what you're needing to transfer back and forth, and the overall cost and security risk. But if you've got both of them available to you, the good news is that you can mix and match these based upon the needs that's there. So if you have questions on this, we'd love to dig in with you. Excited to see this access evolving over time and looking forward to how we can help you connect all of those applications together and share that data. Until the next time, thanks for tuning in. Let us know if you have other topics that would be of interest to you.
Thanks for tuning in to AI and Automation in Action. If today's conversation sparked ideas about how AI or automation could improve your operations, we'd love to continue that discussion with you. Join us next time as we showcase another real-world implementation and break down how to deploy AI responsibly and effectively. And if you want to brainstorm with our team, email us anytime at ideas@innovativeautomations.ai. Until next time.